I have friends. I definitely have friends. Friends, friendly friends. I have all the friends. But they don't want to play Dungeons & Dragons or any other role-playing game with me. Now, for the sake of my eggshell thin ego, I've decided that this isn't a me problem. This also isn't a dig at my friends. They are awesome people and I love them a lot. We get on great and share in loads of other aspects of life. But when it comes to joining in the wonderful world of TTRPGs, they just don't want to play. When I asked them why not, the varying versions of no were fascinating and revealed how I can bring some of them with me to this hobby that I love so much. If your friends are anything like mine, then hopefully this video can help you. We're going to look at ways of bringing them to your tables in ways that don't feel pressured or forced, and hopefully will mean that they'll keep on coming back again and again. First up, it's good to know just how aware most people are of D&D and TTRPGs in general. The likely answer for most folks is not at all, or maybe it's something they've only heard of in passing. Believe it or not, my lovely viewers, it is possible to live a full and happy life without ever encountering TTRPGs at all. Up until a few years ago, the only way that most folks would have of becoming aware of D&D was through TV shows. I've seen D&D played with, variable levels of accuracy in the IT crowd, Community, and The Big Bang Theory. All three of these, especially the IT crowd episode, show the hobby in a good light overall, but still as something that's only played by, nerdy nerds, and not by normal people at all. This stigma of inaccessibility is something that has stuck with the hobby for years, and it's probably the reason why I only got into TTRPGs much later in life than I could have done. You might think that these days people have way more opportunities to stumble across D&D or any TTRPG, but have you ever looked at default YouTube? This is what the algorithm thing thinks most people will be interested in most of the time, and because they've got all of the data in the world, they're probably right. Having said that, shows like Stranger Things and the D&D movie, as well as actual play series like Critical Role and Dimension 20, are growing the hobby, and more people do have some awareness of what D&D and TTRPGs are. So when I ask my friends if they'd like to play, often I'll get a response like, ooh, is that thing like in Stranger Things where they're all sitting around a table? Some folks say an outright no. And that's fair enough, but others are curious to give it a try. When I've asked more deeply about their reservations, it boils down to three real reasons. First up, there are the misconceptions. While I've never met anyone who still believes in the satanic panic, there are some really strange ideas about what it is that we get up to when we're sitting around a table. Though admittedly, if they see a group playing Merkborg or 10 Candles, then the impression that this is all some strange, weird cult is kind of understandable. For these folks, I'll introduce the hobby as group storytelling, where the dice and mechanics help us out when things are uncertain, and I'll tend to mention some of the more wholesome games to start with. We can save the scary stuff till later. Next, there is the very real fear of embarrassment. To these people, I do my best to remind them that my tables are safe spaces, where people come together to be silly together in a non-judgmental environment. For some people, I know this is literally their idea of hell, and I don't chase them any further. I know some folks have anxiety issues, and above all, I want to be a good friend to them. For others who are willing to try, I remind them that every time you step outside your comfort zone gets a little larger. It is a genuine joy for me when I see people overcoming their fears and joining in at a table. We also have folks who feel that they're just not that kind of person. I've got a friend who I love dearly who said that they just don't have that kind of creative brain. They don't think that they've got imagination. Regardless of whether they do have a creative side or not, that feeling within them is absolutely real to them, and it's something that I need to respect. This is also a friend who I'd hate it if they felt uncomfortable on my account, so we've agreed to leave it at that, and when we want to hang out, we go get burritos together. If you've got someone like this in your life, I'd be really curious to know what happened when you tried to bring them to your games. Did it go well? Did it go badly? Please do tell me in the comments. Some folks are just never going to get into roleplay games, in the same way as I'm never going to be a golf person, and that's okay. But for everyone else, for the curious people, what can we do to best bring them into the hobby? I reckon there are two types of folks who are easy wins to being persuaded to try TTRPGs, the adjacent and the Thespian. The third type of person is much more challenging to persuade, and I'm going to call them the vanilla. First are the adjacent folks. Before discovering TTRPGs, this is certainly the camp that I was in. I loved fantasy, I loved sci-fi, I played Warhammer, I'd completed Skyrim multiple times. I was the perfect candidate to get into D&D, and if any of my friends had told me about it, I would have jumped at the chance. To introduce these folks to TTRPGs, I'd say, well, it's like the biggest computer game you can imagine, but you're playing on a team with your friends, and your actions and decisions really do have consequences in a way that they just never can in a computer game. And also, you probably know half the rules and terminology already. A word of warning with these folks is that if they're anything like I was, then they might not have experience with public speaking or any kind of sort of creativity under pressure, and the role-playing side might be something that people feel uncomfortable with. If someone is playing for the first time, as GM I will always give them the opportunity to narrate their actions in the third person rather than first person. If being put on the spot and being asked, well, what do you do, feels intimidating to them, try asking, well, what does Alan, Slayer of Demons, do? That can be a much easier question to answer, just with that extra degree of separation. Open-ended choices and decisions might also seem daunting to them, especially when they're used to maybe limited dialogue options that you might find in a computer game. Some of these folks might surprise you by embracing the improv and the chaos all around, but if you've got unreasonable expectations of your players, that is the quickest way to make sure that they don't come back again. As for the group I'm calling the Thespians, these are the actors, the improvisers, the ones always looking for the opportunity to do a bit, or to put on some silly voices. My improv friends fit the bill here perfectly. For them, I describe TTRPGs as long-form, character-centric, narrative-focused improv scenes, where the rules and the dice and things are actually not nearly as important as the story that we're going to tell. These are the people who are most likely to have heard of shows like Critical Role, and will probably want to play their games in a similar kind of fashion, with character development and narrative taking centre stage over the rules and mechanics. For your Thespian players, they might have the opposite problems to the adjacent folks. It's likely that the thickness of the rulebooks and the sheer amount of stuff on a character sheet will be barriers to them actually enjoying themselves at the table. I'd advocate for drip feeding the mechanics to them. They don't need to know all the rules in order to have a good time. Even though I came to D&D as the TTRPG adjacent nerdy nerd, I now feel that the loose, improvised style of play is much more my cup of tea. Though having said that, I do still want the dice and the rules and the mechanics to matter, as those are what gives the game some real stakes, in a way that group story time just never could. Now to the vanilla folks. These people are my absolute favourites to get around a table. These are the people with no apparent interest in the hobby, with no exposure to anything make-believe. Among my friends, these are the ones who spend their free time shopping, playing golf, watching football. It's fair to say we don't have a huge amount in common, but they can be amazing players if they're willing to give TTRPG night a chance. For them, I'll try and make time for a one-to-one introduction to what the hell's it is that I'm planning for them. I'll show them a character sheet. We can roll a couple of dice, and we can go through the absolute fundamentals of the game at their own pace. When you do this, don't be surprised to hear some questions that you've never thought of before. I hope you all can answer the question if they say, oh, which one's the D20? It's that one there. We can do this. But questions like, why is it called armor class, might stump you. There are a lot of things which us folks who are deep into the hobby don't give a second thought to, but it is a great test of your knowledge to try and explain games from absolute first principles. Some games with brand new vanilla players can be astonishing. It's as though they've finally got permission, they've got freedom to be creative, silly, whimsical and strange in a way that they've just not tried in the rest of their lives. They're also gloriously unaware of the conventions and standards within fantasy games. Once I had a player like this who looked through their inventory for the first time and decided to eat their bedroll, just because it sounded tasty. Now, I didn't have the heart to tell them that, oh, that's not food, you shouldn't be eating that. I said, oh, great idea. Here's 10 hit points, and we got on with our evening. For these players, they can be absolute wildcards. It might be the role-playing they struggle with, it could be the dice and mechanics, or some of them might just take to it like naturals. It's best to take everyone at their own merits, and to check in with folks through the night to see how they're getting on. Whoever you end up playing with, I hope that you're a welcoming ambassador to the hobby. To help you with this, there's two things I'd recommend you to do. Number one is getting the vibes right and welcoming players. This video has a load of tips on that. Number two is to teach your players your system of choice. This video has advice that I share from a college professor and a high school teacher. Both of these are great videos if you're just starting out as a game master and looking to really nail the fundamentals.